Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you were able to join us for this program because it will be the finishing program of a whole series we have done on forgiveness, God's mercy, a new life. And we want to get right to the nuts and bolts of how we're going to do that. And so here we have Deacon Glenn Harmon.
Father.
Thank you for joining us again. And we want to talk about these concepts: forgiveness, mercy, accepting God's love. How do we get to put them into practice?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you have a nice little word that you use in your mission, so tell us how you kind of describe that last part of your missions.
I call this last session when the rubber meets the road. Otherwise, if we don't live this in a practical way, it just becomes theory. Mm-hmm. It's nice up here, nice theology, but we are called by God to live this in our daily lives. And for me personally, the way we do that is through faith. Now, faith, again, can be a very complicated topic, and I want to try to make this very practical and real, because that's the only way I can figure it out. If it's practical and real, I got it. So what I want to spend a little time on, at least at the beginning of our program, is looking at what faith is and what it isn't, and then how to make it real in our lives. If you take the letter to the Hebrews, if you ever wondered how important faith is, in chapter 11, verse 6, it says that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Doesn't say you can do it once in a while. It says it is impossible to please God without faith. So if we wonder how important faith is, you can't do it. You can't please Him without it. So I guess one of the questions I would throw out to the viewers, at this moment in your life, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you right now to please God? 1 meaning you could care less if you please Him, to 10 it's the most important thing in your life. We can't do it without faith. Then we move up the page a little bit to Hebrews 11:1, where it says, faith is the realization of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So in other words, when we choose to step out in faith in some area of our life, and every one of us at this moment have at least one area of our life where God is challenging us and loving us by asking us to step out to a greater degree in faith. When we do that, we begin to realize that what we're hoping for has already happened when there is no evidence at the moment that it ever will. Now, the world we live in says you're crazy, because we live in a world that operates completely on the senses. In other words, if you can't see it or hear it or taste it or touch it or smell it, it doesn't exist. Faith is operating outside the realm of the senses. That's why Jesus said, blessed are those who believe but cannot see. Because He knew 2,000 years later, after He walked this earth, it would take a tremendous amount of faith to believe that He is really who He says He is. So if we take that concept of faith is realizing that what we're hoping for has already happened when there's no evidence that it has, the next question I would ask your viewers is, right now, what are you hoping for? Maybe it's a marriage that's not working the way you want it to work right now. You've tried everything you can, but it's not working. But your hope, begin to realize that what you're hoping for has already happened, that that marriage is renewed, restored, and recreated when in the moment there's no evidence it ever will be. Maybe it's a child that's saying and doing things you never thought they'd ever say and do, and you think you've tried everything you can do. Well, first of all, give that child to God. That child was God's before it was yours. And begin to realize that that child has been healed, restored, and renewed when at the moment there's no evidence. And I want to share with you, if you would allow me to.
Yes, I'd like for you to make this concrete, because you know, people will say, well, that's all nice words. Okay, give me some real hardcore evidence.
I will.
In your own life.
All right, I'll give you 2 examples. Again, God said never to preach on anything I haven't lived. My wife, Linda, we have 2 very beautiful daughters. Our youngest daughter, Kelly, is 36 years old and an absolutely beautiful child of God, married with a beautiful daughter. But when Kelly turned 16, she decided to try every drug on the face of the earth and wash it down with alcohol. And we had no idea what to do with this child. She had hooked up with the wrong group of people. Yeah. She was raised in a Catholic home. We had done what we thought were all the right things. And we're seeing our daughter go down a road that we never thought she'd ever go down. And at some point, literally, to keep her from killing herself, we put her in a psychiatric hospital. Mm. And as we were walking away, I'll never forget, she was screaming at me, "Dad, I hate you. I will never forgive you." And there's nothing more painful to a father than hear your daughter say that. Yeah. And for 12 months, Linda and I stood in faith, believing that child would be healed, restored, and recreated when there was no evidence in front of us that she ever would be. We had to come out of living in the senses and start living in faith. We had to put into practice what we say we believed. And a few days ago, I called Kelly. She lives in Maui, tough life. And we were visiting, and I had to go. And I said, "Honey, I love you." And she said, "Dad, I love you too." And I don't think that child will ever know what those words mean to me today. There was a time in her life that I questioned whether she'd ever reach 17, let alone 37. Mm-hmm. But we reached a point that all the theory, all the head stuff didn't mean anything. Yeah. We had to take what we said we believed and put it into practice. We had to hope and believe in something we couldn't see, Father. Mm-hmm. And right now, your viewers, in some area of your life, it's not working. There is no evidence that it ever will work. But as children of God, as people of faith, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when we have to say, I'm going to live this now. I'm not going to play around with it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to live it. God loves people that will live their faith. He loves all people, but when he sees someone really trying to live their faith in the midst of the struggle.
And that's so difficult for us. As you said, we are so sense-driven. Right. And we don't even realize that our whole life in the modern world is media and sense-stimulated.
Right.
And so, of course, it is difficult for us to learn to live in a different way. Right. But it actually goes back. I remember always my grandfather. It was a word given would be kept. Mm. There were no lawyers. There was no contract. He would give you a handshake. Once he would give you the handshake and say, "That's what I'm going to pay you for," whatever it was he was buying. Even if he made a mistake, he would have never gone back on that word. And so that's what it means, really acting on what we believe. Right. And I know that you, even in your ministry today, which endears you to people, I think, so much, you and your wife, you're so credible witnesses because you live that which the Lord has led you to preach. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit about your financial reserves.
18 years ago when we started this ministry, God said something to us, and it didn't make a lot of sense then, and I still question even today, God, are you sure? He said that we were never, when we go out to do missions or retreats, we don't ask for a stipend or a fee of any kind. We take a love offering on the last night of the mission, and we don't know if 500 people are going to be there or 12 people are going to be there. We've gone to give missions across the country, and 12 people have showed up. God said, your faith is in me. You are going to live what you say you believe. Mm-hmm. And when we started our ministry 18 years ago, we had 2 houses. Remember, I was a corporate exec then.
Exactly, yeah.
We sold both of our houses, gave a lot of our stuff away, and I told my bride, I said, don't worry about this. This is going to be just fine. And we started living off of our savings. God had given us a mission and a message to preach, and I was excited. Well, I started calling. Nobody wanted to hear anything I had to say. And I couldn't understand this because I knew God had called us to this. He had equipped us. He had given a message to preach. Nobody wanted to hear us. And for 18 months, nobody. And we got, you don't think my faith wasn't being tested? Because I knew at any time during that 18 months, I could pick up the phone and in 30 minutes, I'd have 6 corporate jobs offered to me with a 6-figure income. And when you're down to like 3 weeks worth of money left, it is easy to run back where it's comfortable. And one of the things I've learned when it comes to living your faith, when you start to live your faith, you need to burn the bridges behind you. Because when it gets tough, and it will get tough, living your faith in this world is going to be tough. You will run back to where it's comfortable, even though you know you're not supposed to be there. So I burned my bridges. And one day, nobody was calling, 3 weeks worth of money left, and I got this phone call from this guy who was running a Catholic retreat center in Florida. And he said, we heard about you. We understand that you're a Catholic singer too. I said, yeah. He said, well, we'd like you to come down and sing. I said, great. Well, the first question out of my mouth was, how much are you going to pay me? He said, nothing. I said, I said, we are going to pay my expenses there and back, right? He said, no. If you want to come, you just got to come. So I said, I'll get back to you. So I talked to Linda and I said, honey, if we go, this is going to take everything we have left. We prayed, we went. I was supposed to sing 2 songs in the morning, 2 songs in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. Well, after I got done on Wednesday, I was just literally broken because I didn't see the point in this. I'd done what God asked me to do. I was being faithful to that, and I was almost broke. So I looked at my wife. I wish you could have met my wife. Because after I got done singing, it was lunch, and I looked at her, and I said, honey, I don't feel like doing this anymore. Let's just pack up and leave. She looked at me and she said, Glenn, you don't have to feel like doing anything. Just do it. And I realized that faith and feelings have nothing to do with each other. You know, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, it didn't feel good.
Exactly.
And fortunately for you and for me, he didn't jump off the cross when the pain got bad enough and said, Father, this hurts too much. He hung there until he died. So I said, I need to clear my head. So I went out, and this retreat center was huge, and I just started walking around, and I think I had the most intense, honest conversation I'd ever had with God in my life. I held nothing back. I figured, what's the point, you know? So I come around, and I start going through the double doors of this retreat center, tears just running down my face. And I remember saying to God, would you please just show me something? I said, you don't have to part the Red Sea. You don't have to raise somebody from the dead. Just show me something that I'm on the right track here. So I walked in, and I'm about 5 minutes late. The orchestra, the band is wondering where I am, and I start walking towards the stage. And off to my right, almost at a gallop, comes this Catholic priest I had never met. There were hundreds of people at this retreat center. Had never met him, didn't even know who he was. And when his eyes lock on mine, there's this sense of relief in his eyes, and he comes over, he says, now remember, about 2 minutes ago, I'm outside the door saying, would you just show me something? Right. He says, Glenn, well, I know we've never met, but he said, about 2 minutes ago, I was in the chapel all by myself. He said, I was praying about something completely different. And God put you on my heart. And he said, you're to get up right now and find him. And when you find him, you're to tell him that he has a powerful ministry. And I'm supposed to invite you to my diocese so you can preach and sing. Would you like to do that? I mean, as far as I was concerned at that moment, God raised somebody from the dead. Yeah. And I looked at, that would have been enough for me, Father. I looked at this priest and I said, I'll get back to you and we'll work something out. So now I'm about 10 minutes late. I was supposed to be singing, but God wasn't done. See, we serve an on-time God. God's not a minute early. God's not a minute late. He's normally late for us. He's right on time. And God was right on time that day. So I started moving towards the stage, and I glance off to my left, and there's this little white-haired lady sitting behind this table, and she gives me one of these. Now the orchestra's up there giving me one of these, and she's over there. Upset. Exactly. So I went over to her. I'll never forget her name as long as I live, Irene Campus. And I said, how can I help you? She said, you don't remember me, do you? I said, no. She said, Glenn, Monday after you sang your first 2 songs, I came up to you and I asked you if you had a music CD. And you said you didn't, because way back there we didn't have any of that stuff. And in a very hesitant voice, she said, why don't you have one? And I said, Miss Campus, it cost over $5,000 to go into a recording studio and cut a CD. I said, I don't know where my next rent check's coming from. And this little lady let out this groan, and I said, what's the matter? She said, Glenn, God woke me up on Tuesday morning at 3 o'clock, and God never wakes me up. And he said to me that I'm supposed to give you the money to do that CD. She said, I've been fighting it for 2 days. I can't fight it anymore. She took out her checkbook, wrote me a check for $5,000, and said, go make that CD. Between that priest, Father Oris Broussard of Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Irene Campus of Pensacola, Florida, those two people had never met each other. They never met each other. But God used those as vehicles to begin this ministry 18 years ago. And it has just been a wild ride ever since then.
But he brought you to a point where you were ready basically to surrender.
Right. I was ready to give up.
Yeah.
I was ready because for 18 months there was no evidence. I couldn't see it. And there are people, some of you out there right now, that are ready to give up. You don't see a point of going on. You don't see a purpose. This is where you have to come down to, do you really believe Jesus is who he says he is? Mm-hmm. If you believe it, then you just keep persevering. You have the faith. Remember, we serve an on-time God, and he will honor your faith.
And that is many times, like you say, it is, God is there at the right time, but we expecting it earlier, or we are impatient.
We live in a microwave society. You know, it's like I can have a full meal in 5 minutes. So it's like, God, I prayed at 10 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't see anything happening. Yeah. We give God a very short amount of time.
I think the one point that comes to my mind as well as we're talking is self-reliance. Mm-hmm. And I feel, as I was listening to you and your story, those 18 months, you were living off your savings, and there was still a certain self-reliance.
Absolutely.
And maybe if we come back now full swing to that final understanding of how do we have a trusting, loving relationship with God, how do we learn to forgive ourselves, forgive others, release them, and thereby release us. Mm-hmm. How do we connect that with faith?
Well, first of all, we have to have an understanding and awareness of what it is. And we've tried over these programs to understand intellectually what forgiveness is, what mercy, what agape love, what all the roadblocks, what they are. Mm-hmm. But at some point, we have to realize we can have all the theology in the world. We can have all the intellect in the world. If you look at who Jesus chose, it says in Scripture, he chose 12 apostles, and it says they were ordinary, uneducated men. Why did he pick them? Because they wouldn't analyze it too much. They would just go do it. Mm-hmm. We have to take all of this that we know, and we just have to go do it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We just have to say, okay, I'm going to go do it. And we put it into practice. And when we put it into practice, we see God fulfill his promises. God will always be God. And he will always, but we don't give him enough time. See, we don't trust him enough. We say, Lord, I'm going to give you 1 day. Lord, I might give you a week, but that's it. God's time is not our time. We just don't trust him enough. We don't believe who he says he is, and we don't give him the time.
Well, see, that reminds me so much when St. Paul talks about if we become unfaithful, God remains faithful. Why? Because he can't go against his own nature. Right. He is faithfulness himself. And so as you have experienced over all these years in your own life, and you still practice it today in your active ministry, this tremendous making acts of faith all over again. Every time, I suppose, if you go on a mission, a parish mission, you do the same act of faith. Absolutely. And so we have a few minutes left. Why don't you give us and our audience a little bit of a overview? would it be if maybe you guys out there want to have him come into your parish and give a parish mission so you can experience more of what we have been just talking about? Because this is almost like just an appetizer.
Right.
Huh?
Right.
So tell us, what do? You come for how much time do you demand? How much effort will it cost for a parish to prepare for you? Tell us something about that.
Well, basically, Linda and I show up, if the mission, let's say, is Monday through Thursday, it's 4 nights. Mm-hmm. We show up the Friday before. I assist as deacon at all the weekend masses. I preach all the homilies at the weekend masses to get
Great.
people hopefully excited about it. Mm-hmm. And I basically ask them just to show up. The missions are all about making their life better. You know, we live in a world that is so demanding. If we think that we can get through this world without a relationship with God, we're just kidding ourselves.
Right.
So I tell people, if they'd like to have more peace, more hope, more joy, more love and faith, if they'd like to have a better understanding of who this Jesus is and what he is asking of them, just to show up. That's all that's required. Come in with an open mind and an open heart, and God will do the rest.
So if a parish says, okay, I'd like to have you come in and do a parish mission, how do they actually go about that?
They can actually, the best way to do it is to go onto our website, which is www.glennharmonministries.org. Okay. And they can reach us by phone, by mail, by email. We are right now booked out about 1.5 to 2 years, which is amazing when you think 18 years ago I was pleading for the phone to ring, and now we're booked out about 1.5 to 2 years.
Just got to keep praying God gives you your health and keeps you in good shape, because the life on the road is a little bit...
Yeah, we're on the road about 30 to 35 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
But I would not... I had everything the world said you're supposed to have, and it pales in comparison to sharing the good news of Jesus with my brothers and sisters.
And I think for any one of us who are listening to you and to your wife, hopefully next time we can have her on the program.
I hope so.
But just this prospect that we can be set free, and we have a life that is free of all these things that strangle us. And many of them are really dealing in a major way with unforgiveness, holding grudges, and resentments. They strangle us. And like you even mentioned, that one lady who was strapped 20 years after the death of her mother, still strapped by her own lack of unforgiveness. So I really want to thank you for sharing all that you have.
It's been a privilege.
It's been a great series, and I thank you for being with us, and I hope you will be able somewhere here pick up the information, and maybe you can one day experience Deacon Glenn and his wife during a parish mission, and you yourself can get to that freedom that comes from believing and trusting in Christ. God bless you. See you someday here at Family Land.